The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Josh Roffman, and he is the EVP of Marketing at Loftware. And we're going to be diving into what Loftware does. We're going to be talking about labels and their evolution through the supply chain as we see more technology being in the supply chain and entering into the supply chain. And we're also going to dive into the idea of digital transformations, how to get started with a digital transformation, what to consider, and also about some correlations between AI and cloud technologies and how that kind of all comes together within those digital transformations. So Josh, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. We had you on quite a long time ago, so it's great to connect again and get Loftware back on here. How are you?
Great, Kevin. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, glad to reconnect. It was mid-pandemic, I think, last time we chatted. So good to connect here in New World afterwards.
Yeah, definitely different times now, we could say, for sure. And a lot of transformation coming out of the pandemic, actually. So kind of maybe fitting in a sense that we're having our follow-up conversation to talk about transformation. But I guess before we get into all that and started on the topic, why don't you kind of give us a brief overview of Loftware and what it is you all do for those that are maybe are not familiar?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Loftware has been around in the space for nearly 40 years, really pioneers when it came to labeling. And really what we do is we help over 12,000 of the world's best companies, help them by enabling authentic, compliant, and traceable products through the connected supply chain. So, there's more complexity than ever in the supply chain. And we're really trying to help our customers who span over 15 different industries, global companies all over the world, deal with all these unique challenges that never existed really before. But as you've built more complexity, more regulations, more geographical uniqueness, the whole notion of managing product as it travels through the supply chain in the level of complexities that are faced have never been greater.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at the root of all that, certainly labels have been just omnipresent throughout the supply chain for such a long time. You guys have been around for 40 years. So, that's a bit of a testament to the strength of a label, right? And I think, that type of thing is just, it's evolved in some sense, but it's always kind of been there. It's a way to identify, a way to track, a way to convey information through different parts of the supply chain overall. But talk to us a little bit about, how, I guess, in those 40 years and, especially in the last couple of years, we're just talking about, the pandemic and things that have changed around that. How have labels continued to evolve, and especially, the evolution of that as we see more technology coming into the supply chain or in the warehouse industry overall?
Yeah, I think as you look at just labeling specifically, we've seen certainly some evolution in terms of things like symbologies and things of that nature, and how individual items are labeled, and there's more labels out there than ever. But I think what's really unique is the digital intersection with labeling. It's what you can do beyond the label these days.
Yeah.
That perhaps is more interesting. The ability to have that label being that connection point, that link between the physical and the digital, to really give you that jumping off point for the next thing, the next question you want to ask, the next bit of information you need about a product or a good. And that can relate to anything from incremental contextual information about the product, so you know more about the product. it might relate to that product's journey. And some of it could even be more contextualized for you as a consumer. It might relate to the language that you want to review things in to find more information. So, and with a lot of the mandates out there in terms of new regulations, there's been a lot more pressure to label items, be able to do something with that information, and in many cases, be able to identify products more uniquely than ever. So at the item level, which I'd say is a huge area of evolution that once started really in the more in the life sciences where you have to track a med device or a pharma product, but now it's become much more ubiquitous.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting just how, I guess, powerful in a sense when you put it in that context. The label has become this carrier of this information and this data, and giving you those closer looks, like you said, from a digital perspective, and just kind of conveying, I guess, in between all those digital points, that information along the way, whether it's from a scan capture or some type of reader or something of that nature, to be able to just extract that much and understand and have that greater visibility as well, like you mentioned, which started in pharma, but now visibility has become just such an important thing, from delivering to a consumer to a business to business type of scenario. It's just the expectation that we've come to find, and it's certainly having that increased in visibility certainly allows us to optimize our supply chains and drive them that much better. So talk to us a little bit about, from that digital perspective, how does that evolution that's taken place, how does that now lead into digital transformation, which I think has been certainly a topic and a subject that a lot of people have been talking about. It's been in the industry news, for a little while now, and a lot of people are going through these digital transformations. So I guess maybe start by telling us, in your view, like, what is a digital transformation? And then, how does like the label and what you do at Loftware kind of get involved in these digital transformations?
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects when we talk about digital transformation in our world. I think there's, on the front side of the equation, what was once manual processes and analog processes that are now digitized. And on the front side, that could be literally the labeling process, which was manually done, automating that now, triggering it from systems of truth that are fully integrated, so that you've got your SAP systems out there that automatically trigger labeling for downstream use. Some of that process was done manually before. I think that at a base level represents some of the digital transformation. I think you also see the process of being able to automate the application of labels, the ability to automatically, dynamically create labels rather than having to create each and every variation really manually, one at a time, the ability to dynamically draw business rules that can basically handle what I consider to be all the complexities of labeling. And that could be geography, regulations, industry, business, product, et cetera. All that is being automated these days, which is, a tremendous step forward. I think that is one answer on the front side. But then I think as you look at the backside, that's perhaps where even more interesting possibilities have evolved just over the last couple of years and are evolving going forward. Again, that's where we're talking about jumping off from the physical, going to the digital. So before, you were really just trying to scan a label, you get a little bit of information on it, and that could help you on the next stage of the journey. But what we're talking about these days is far more significant and potentially transformational, because the world of information that you can gather now, the visibility that you have into each step of a product along a supply chain's journey, whether or not it's authentic, so that you're preserving, brand, whether or not, you're seeing something that's set up for circularity, right? You need to know not just how it's produced, but how it should be disposed. There's all these different possibilities, in addition to just providing a lot more information in context and value to the users, that I think is very much at the heart of the digital transformation we've seen over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think certainly, To your point and all the different things you listed there, I mean, there's certainly a lot more complexities that are involved in today's supply chain to, deliver that information in certain ways, whether it's from, like you said, a sustainability aspect or, whatever the case may be. I mean, having the ability to do that and really see the power of this information, this data that's being carried by this label, and then dynamically be able to change it, like you said, if it's needed, if something is going to one retailer versus another one, and so the label needs to look differently from a compliance perspective. There's a lot of variation there, and being able to automatically change that and have that dynamically change certainly reduces a lot of operational complexities from a manual standpoint when you're able to automate that and continue to have that kind of change go throughout that transformation, which leads to a lot better results and a lot better efficiency over time. So talk to us a little bit about that from the compliance perspective as well, because you see, along with these more complexities and more demanding, supply chain requirements, there's also a lot of more compliance issues, whether it's from a retailer, asking for certain compliance on the way things are packaged or labeled, or it's coming from your supplier. On that side, how does kind of this digitalization really help address some of these compliance issues?
Yeah, this is an area where we've seen a huge amount of focus. I'd say it started with what I would call more traditional regulatory compliance, where there was a requirement to either adhere to a particular format or standard, or have some sort of unique identifier. A medical device, as an example, needed to have something called UDI, where could be uniquely identified, both the product and then the serialized unit through the supply chain. And that's obviously important for things like recalls and events like that, and so that exactly which unit a patient used, consumed, etc. So we've seen that broaden in terms of other different industries. So that's more of a regulatory type bent. But I'd say a particularly interesting area that we've seen a lot of traction in is in the supplier compliance area. And we've got use cases where very large multinational companies that have thousands of suppliers are at this point have been risking in excess of $100 million a year because their suppliers haven't been able to properly label the items that they need to receive. And so there's a tremendous amount of cost in terms of waste, relabeling, rework, returns, etc. I mean, Walmart, of course, is famous for fining their suppliers for getting things wrong. But what we are seeing is actually, rather than taking a punitive look, we're seeing some of these really large multinational companies extend labeling to their suppliers to help them adhere to supplier compliance. And it's a powerful model that leverages the cloud. And the whole notion there is the company itself knows exactly the standard it wants to set. The challenge is, how do you get all those suppliers to comply? How do you get them to change when you need to make a change? And how do you make sure that what you're receiving is received consistently across that network of, let's say, a couple thousand suppliers? And so the trick really is being able to leverage some of the new cloud technology to define the standards internally within the company, and then to extend the definition and some of these labeling capabilities via the cloud to this entire network, so they all have the right label templates to use. They all have the definitions for what needs to be essentially put on the label, such that each one of them uniquely produces a label. And when it's received, it's going to be right, because by definition, it's the company's definition of that label. So that rather than having to double check, rather than having to relabel, it immediately goes into their supply chain. And that can go into the warehouse. It can be co-manufacturing, straight to distribution, wherever it may be. Key is that it's going to be compliant. And so that's really been a huge game changer. We're seeing a lot of motion in that area.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting thing. I mean, I know early in my career, I was tasked with trying to combat some of those chargebacks from, the Amazons and the Barnes and Nobles and things like that. And that's was not fun, to put it lightly and simply. And, so I like the idea that they're now helping their suppliers to be able to be more compliant instead of just, this is what you did wrong, this is what you did wrong, this is what you did wrong. Now, like you said, they're extending that labeling to them as well. And I think, with the technology advancement, and you mentioned kind of the cloud there as well, that's certainly something that I think makes something like that more viable and more easy to do. And, when you update something, it's easier to push that out to the cloud. And now everybody has access to that instead of, waiting for people to update on their side, or, maybe they missed an email with an update or something like that. So you're able to push that kind of out. And I'm curious, when we look at this landscape, and, certainly there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and AI as well within the supply chain. How does that kind of come into the mix between, AI and cloud-based technologies within this kind of digital transformation landscape?
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Do you want more warehouse content delivered to your inbox? Sign up for our new email series called Warehouse Wisdom Wednesday to get an educational series of emails on warehouse basics delivered directly to you every Wednesday morning. Find the sign up link in the show notes.
Yeah, so I'd say we're spending a lot of time talking to customers about certainly cloud, and more recently more on AI.
Yeah.
I think notion of AI and being able to automate certainly is at the core, both from a supply chain perspective, and certainly our customers are looking at that, and we're at the vanguard of looking at what can we do from a labeling perspective. How can we make it so that label changes and label creation can be done seamlessly in an automated fashion, how we can more quickly transition labels from one type to another format with less work. How can we validate that the label that's printed matches from a quality perspective, the gold standard? Those are all things that we're spending a lot of time on, and we see, it's interesting. We did a survey of our customers, as we do with our trends report every year, and these numbers aren't completely surprising. 76% of our respondents thought that AI would transform their business operations and supply chains over the next 3 years. But when we ask the next question, which is, well, how are you using it today? 17% said that they've actually incorporated it into their existing processes.
Yeah.
So there's a long road ahead of us, but I think we see a tremendous amount of promise. I'd like to say that we were having a similar conversation with cloud, 8-10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, we're reaping the rewards of it today. So I think them in combination can be really powerful. I think one of the unique things that cloud has brought to us is it was able to transform where we were at 10 years ago, where everyone had all these disparate installs of different software solutions in different places. And now really it's provided this ultimate vehicle for standardization and centralization, such that you can have a very core corporate view on how something like labeling can be done. You can extend that, just like we talked about with the suppliers, you can extend it to your whole organization. They can benefit from it. But I think we're right at the cusp of what AI can do, and we're spending a lot of time on it ourselves. And we see some real promise in sort of in the tool set that we've got, and in streamlining some of the work that we do with our customers to really implement the next generation labeling solutions.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that gap is pretty interesting. Like there were, I think you said 76% of people will think that AI will like transform their supply chain in the next 3 years, but only 17% are actually have already implemented something. So I'm curious. That gap, which is essentially, what is that, like a 60% gap almost, right? What do you think is the reason for that? Do you think that there's there's still some skepticism around AI, or do you think it's just, the idea of like what's the right application, where to even start with it? I mean, what do you think is the reason for that at this current moment?
Yeah, I think it probably spans most of those
Mm-hmm.
reasons, Kevin. I also think, there is a factor of, yeah, some of these organizations are very large,
Yeah.
and some ways can be glacial in some of their movements. Adopting the cloud was an issue, and so I think there's an element of that. But I think there is this broad realization. I think if you ask everyone, they say, yeah, we need to have an AI strategy.
Mm.
We don't necessarily know what it is, but we need to have one. And so I think the first step is that recognition that it's going to be really important. I'm seeing some use cases, but what are my use cases? And
Mm.
and so I think it's going beyond a cool search and chat GPT to say, well, what can this do that's going to really make a business impact? And I think that's where the biggest gap
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense because it is, I mean, I certainly have friends they're not in the industry and they're like, oh, how are you guys using AI in the warehouse? And I'm like, well, there's not necessarily really like a proven widespread use case yet. I think that statistic kind of proves that. I think it's certainly out there and marketed from a lot of companies about how they're using AI or bringing AI, and there's a lot of thought pieces about it, and but the penetration still isn't quite there. But I think as time goes on and there's more kind of proven use cases and things like that, I think the adoption will just get easier and easier, because I think that's the one interesting thing about AI is that it kind of continuously improves itself, right? So it's just going to get better and better. So very interesting, yeah, to hear those thoughts from the study. And so we're talking about digital transformation here, and I'm curious kind of the last takeaway here maybe from you, Josh. I mean, is as we look at digital transformation, organizations are starting to think about this. I mean, even as we were just discussing around AI, there may be some question on where would they even start around starting to bring AI into their supply chain or their operations. But digital transformation as a whole, as an organization, if you're approaching and looking to go through a digital transformation, I mean, what would you say would really be the starting point for an organization? Like, how can they really get started, and what should they start to look at first?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of the begin with the end in mind that
Mm.
has to be out there. It's really understanding, what are the key challenges, the truly business impacting challenges. Talk about the challenges with supplier compliance as an example. Talking about risks of mislabeling and fines. Talking about inefficiency. Talking about inability to support new markets because you can't label products correctly. Talk about inconsistency and brand authenticity issues, challenges with traceability. I think it starts with identifying what those business challenges are, and then I think you can map it to how digital transformation can help. And for us, I think we spend a lot of time with people that have had these challenges, and we certainly see a cloud-based, standardized, centralized, enterprise level approach as one that can provide some real tangible ROI. So it's not just about the
Mm.
coolness of cloud. It's about how can you change your company's behavior? How can you change your supply chain's behavior, or how you interact with the supply chain by leveraging the technology. So I think it starts with understanding where the challenges are.
Mm.
Then I think it's about mapping it to capabilities and solutions, and working with a partner that knows how to help, has been there, has done that, to really try to map to the outcomes you're trying to get to. And I think it's really helpful to look at how others have done it.
Mm.
Everyone shouldn't be doing something for the first time. So many of these things have been replicated and tried before. And I think learning from what we've experienced before and helping to guide, I know we do with our customers, to an end state that's going to be able to map back to those base requirements is kind of core. I think AI is one step further, but part of that as well. How is it that we can leverage AI and our customers can to solve one of those problems? If it doesn't solve a core problem, then it's probably just a cool technology.
Yeah, definitely insightful there. And I think, it's, I love that you said, start with the end in mind, kind of like where you're really trying to get. And I guess to your last point there around AI, like don't necessarily go after technology and chase technology just because that's the talk of the moment, right? And the thing that's hot right now. And I think, planning that carefully so that you can, create that roadmap to get to what your end goal is in mind makes a lot of sense there. So very interesting stuff with you here, Josh, and a very insightful conversation around digital transformation and the evolution of labels overall and kind of the AI perspective too, and really interesting stats from that report that you mentioned there. So if people are interested in maybe seeing that report that you mentioned earlier or learning more about Loftware and getting in touch and learning how you guys can help them with their labeling or digital transformation in general, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, certainly loftware.com is the place to go. I mean, it's got a lot of there's some great resources out there that you can leverage. The one that I referenced there is Top 5 Trends, which is a piece we do every year surveying 1,000 or so professionals in the supply chain and coming out with the top 5 trends for the year. So that's worth checking out. And there's a bunch of other resources there, and certainly plenty of contact information there if you wanted to reach out, and we'd be happy to chat with you and tell you what others have done and some of the experiences they've had. And we're always happy to help.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well so people can easily find it. So Josh, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.